We are so pleased that the City Club has chosen to meet here at the historic Wow Hall. We are an all-ages performing arts venue and a nonprofit, volunteer, and staff-run organization. 2025 marks our 50th anniversary, and we couldn't be more pleased to further our civic engagement efforts by welcoming the City Club to the Wow Hall. We invite folks to become a Wow Hall volunteer, see a show, attend a class, become a sustaining member, have a community gathering, or rent the Wow Hall for a private event, which I got to do for my 10-year reunion for North Eugene High School a couple years ago. Now I'd like to turn it over to my friend Andrew Kallick, the current president of the City Club.
Thomas didn't mention it. In addition to all the other things he does in our community, he's president-elect of City Club. So give it up for Thomas. There was no collusion, no untoward behavior that we're here. We are here because it's a great space, and we are very grateful to the Wow Hall and the staff here for your work and your welcoming as we begin our 35th season of City Club programming with our September 6th program, Threats to Democracy, a conversation with Peter DeFazio. Since 1990, the City Club has been dedicated to our founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. And in accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You're invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, to learn something new, and to take active steps to make a difference in this city and region that we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors for the 2024-25 season. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. We've got just 60 days till the election, and with that, City Club is an essential component of our civic infrastructure. We're also an entirely volunteer-led nonprofit and the only city club in Oregon that continues to produce weekly programming. In other words, we need you. So we're currently in our Summer of Support campaign. It's happening now through the end of the month. So please go to cityclubofeugene.org and give what you can so we can continue to bring this programming to folks from the coast to the Cascades. I'll now turn the mic over to Joel Corin, the chair of our program committee and the coordinator of today's program. Joel.
When I heard Peter give this lecture to the Wayne Morse Center as the Wayne Morse Scholar, I knew this is a program that City Club had to hear. Threats to democracy. Should you be concerned? Today, while waiting to start the program, on my feed from the publication The Hill comes notification that the Attorney General of Texas has sued 3 counties for trying to register voters. There are other anti-democratic voter suppression measures going on around the country. In 1836, Alexis de Tocqueville, in his work Democracy in America, warned about the tyranny of the majority. Today, I think we have to be more concerned about the tyranny of the minority. And you'll hear from Peter DeFazio. Peter David Letterman has a show, My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. And that certainly applies to Peter. But I'm going to give you a little bit anyway. He served in Congress from 1987 to 2023. In 2019, he became chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and during that period of time, while he was chair, that's when the bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed. A major piece of legislation. And he was born in Massachusetts, got a bachelor's degree at Tufts, and a master's degree that will interest this group in gerontology from the University of Oregon. He was a member of the United States Air Force Reserve and worked as an aide to U.S. Representative Jim Weaver prior to going on the Lane County Board of Commissioners. This is not Peter's first rodeo. When we walked in here today, we were handed a paper from April 6, 2021, where Doug Emhoff was touring the WOW Center as part of a vaccination program that was here. The governor and Pete were at his side. Peter, you're on.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate the opportunity to be once again before the Eugene City Club. This speech, I first gave a version of the speech in 2010 at Merton College at Cambridge. There was a professor at the U of O, some of you knew him, Dick Cheney. He used to have a comedy group, and he invited me over to give a speech. And I said, what do you want me to talk about? He said, talk about the future of American democracy. So that was the first time I gave the speech. It was America's representative democracy, can it survive? And I gotta say, the students, the Brits, everyone who was there was shocked. At that point, I was talking about Citizens United and some other things. But since then, I've given the speech a number of times, and most recently, a more academic version of it at the U of O in March. So this will be boiled down a little bit. There is going to be some history. It's critical to look at the founding of the nation and the founding documents to find some of the problems that we have today. We first had the Articles of Confederation. There was a lot of post-war turmoil with the debt, and there was resentment about taxation, gold standard, and other things. One state could veto anything that the government wanted to do, so the founders thought this just isn't working. Now, there was one great example they could have adopted, which was the state of Pennsylvania. They had a unicameral legislature. They had one-year terms, 7-year term limits. They allowed people who didn't own property to vote, men, of course, only, white men, of course, only. And they also taxed property for public education. Well, that was not the model that our founders wanted. In fact, they really did not want something that was, a real representative democracy. Alexander Hamilton and Elbert Gerry feared an excess of democracy. They were heavily inspired by Montesquieu, who said there should be a separation of powers, and it should be it should be done to create competing entities so little will get done and create a stasis. Madison called him the Oracle. And so basically that was the inspiration for the founding of our country. They divided us, we're gonna have a House and a Senate with different modes and times of election. Then they had an extensive debate about, the composition of the Senate for months, ended with the Connecticut Compromise I'll talk about later. In the House, each state number of seats would be in proportion to population, including a 3/5 count for each slave to further, placate the slave states. And of course, in the Senate, they all had the same number of seats, and they were appointed by the states until 1913 with the 17th Amendment. Madison feared without these compromises, they wouldn't have been able to get the Constitution done, and he's probably right. But these are fatal flaws in a number of cases. We have a bicameral legislature, the House and the Senate. We have these are the 7 filters they put in place to really avoid an excess of democracy. bicameral legislature, House, Senate, electoral college, Supreme Court, presidential veto power, and then they delegated to the states that they could create their own process for governments, which led to large gerrymandering problems. I'll get into that later. Which, for instance, between 1968 and 16, the party with fewer votes won the state house 121 times and the state senate 146 times. The Constitution requires 3/4 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the states to amend. Scholars say it is the most difficult constitution in the world to amend. So the seeds of dysfunction were planted right there at the beginning, and now they've evolved. First, the House. House was to reflect popular sentiment as an exact portrait of the people. But with the check of the Senate, of course, presidential veto power, this left room for Congress and the states to experiment with Article 1, Section 4, time, place, and manner being left to the states and the legislatures. But Congress may, at any time by law, alter such regulations except the places of choosing senators. This is important when we get to the issue of gerrymandering. The problems in the House. From 46 till 62, many districts had large imbalances in population, with people of color in particular not being represented in the districts, varying state to state. In 62, the Supreme Court made the ruling on the Equal Protection Clause with the 14th Amendment, finalizing that states must operate within the parameters of the Constitution, each district of roughly the same population. And then a fear grew that the southern states would do away with districts and have only statewide representation, which led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This worked really pretty well from the 60s till 1994. Scholars call this, in fact, the four-party era. At this point, I would show some graphs, but we're on the radio, so I won't. But the bottom line is there was a substantial overlap between, if you drew two parabolas, just over here would be a liberal Republican, and another parabola over here would be a conservative Democrat. So there were about 80 to 90 people in between the middle, which reined in the extremes on both ends, and in those days the extremes, either end was not anywhere near as extreme as they are today. But then, came the, Gingrich Revolution, and that began really the hardening of political partisanship. Gerrymandering, took hold in a big way, as time went on, this area of agreement begins to shrink. The Supreme Court ruled also that the redistricting was not tied to the decennial census, which is pretty clear to me. That's what the founders, but these are originalists. So they said for the first time that you could redistrict whenever you wanted. If you take over a majority, you can redistrict. So in Texas, in 2002, they redistricted. And their delegation went from 17 Democrats and 15 Republicans to 21 Republicans and 11 Democrats in 2 years because of gerrymandering. And then, of course, we had the fabulous Citizens United decision, which opened the doors to unlimited spending. It also funded something called Operation Red Map. They targeted 16 states. They flipped 700 legislative seats using new mapping, sophisticated software called Maptitude. And they cracked and packed and created a 33-seat majority in the House, despite the fact that Democrats got 1.4 million more votes for the House that year. So, and then litigation regarding gerrymandering made its way to the Supreme Court, and the court said it's not within the judicial capabilities to rule on gerrymandering because it's a political controversy. And they accepted and expected when you allow legislators to draw lines, despite Article 1, Section 4, for equal protection of the voters. So we can fix gerrymandering. I was on a bill when I left. It's still pending in Congress, of course. Certainly not going to be taken up by this Congress, that would mandate independent commissions in all the states. Congress could also mandate proportional voting, similar to what many in our peer democracies have, where they have proportional multi-member districts. You could increase the size of the House, hasn't been increased since 1915. Could also help, with the gerrymandering problem. And by the way, we have a proposal to gerrymander the commissioner districts here in Lane County, put on the ballot by 3 of the commissioners, only 3 years after we had a Citizens Review Commission do the decennial redistricting, as we all thought we would do. But I guess they're following the Supreme Court precedent. Whenever you get a majority, you can just change things. And this is being done for partisan purposes, even though it's a nonpartisan board. And, and in terms of the House, there are some who say that term limits is a solution. Term limits is not the solution. In fact, there are people who are actually proposing a constitutional convention to, impose term limits on Congress. That's not the problem. And besides that, you can't control a constitutional convention. Everything is on the table. This is agreed to by almost all scholars if you have a constitutional convention. That means the Bill of Rights and any other section of the Constitution that this group happens to disagree with. A very, very dangerous and stupid idea, and hopefully the Oregon legislature won't bite on the bait. Quite a few have, and we're pretty close to having a constitutional convention. Been tried before for balanced budget amendment as one from the left on something else, but constitutional convention is a very, very bad idea. Now we go to the Senate. So in the House, it's an average of 760,000 people per House member. There are 16 senators who do not represent 760,000 people because, as you know, every state gets 2 senators. And right now, 1/2 of the Senate, that is 50 senators, are elected by 17% of the population of the United States of America. It's not a particularly representative body. It was, Madison said we had to do this in order to get the slave states to go along. But at the time, Virginia was the largest state and had 13 times the population of Delaware. Today, in 2020, California has 68 times the population of Wyoming, a difference of 38.5 million people. So one person in Wyoming has 68 times the electoral power of a citizen of California. And by 2040, 70% of the population will be in the 15 largest states. That means that 30% of the population of the United States will elect a supermajority of the Senate, 70% of the Senate by 30% of the people in the United States of America. This is pretty much insoluble because the smaller states will oppose a proportional Senate. Perhaps we could work out some sort of a deal with enlarging the Senate or other things. But again, these would all take constitutional amendments. And, as I mentioned earlier, the Constitution in the United States is the hardest in the world to amend. And then, of course, we have the issue of the filibuster in the Senate. I won't go into great length about that. You've all heard, read about it, seen the movie, but it's not like that anymore. They don't even have to talk anymore. One senator can anonymously say, I'm holding that bill, and tie up the whole Senate. Now, Jeff Merkley, our senator, has been a leader on talking about reforming the filibuster. There's a potential upside and a downside to that. For instance, Obamacare, the bill that passed out of the House was infinitely better than what we ended up with. It had a national, not-for-profit, government-run plan, and the idea was pretty much everybody would say, I'm not going to these stinking insurance companies anymore. I want in the public plan. It's cheaper, it's better. And also had my amendment to take away antitrust immunity from the health insurance industry. All that was gutted out because Kennedy died, and we were then subject to a filibuster in the Senate. So we got stuck with the Senate version of the bill. So, okay, would have been great not to have a filibuster then, but then again, when you think about other things that could be at risk, particularly as we've already talked about, with a very small proportion of the country electing a majority of the United States Senate, 17% of the country, 50% of the Senate, do we really want to be subject to the rule and the whims of 17% of our population in terms of governing the Senate? So that's an issue, for the future, but I don't really think that just fixing the filibuster, or even if we should fix the filibuster, is going to fix the problems with the Senate. Then we go to the Electoral College. I mean, they had a very long debate during the convention about that. And Madison knew that, the South, the slave states, would not abide by a popular vote. Therefore, we ended up with the Electoral College. And, at the time, the founders, we didn't have parties at that point in time. And they thought that the electors would have individual discretion. Unfortunately, at this point, we've moved to a point where every state except for 2 assigns all of their electors to the winner of the vote in that state. There is no discretion. Only Nebraska, 1 district, and Maine, 1 district, they do the electoral vote by district. And in Nebraska, they tried to overturn that because they're afraid they're going to lose that seat. And they have thus far, and probably they can't now change it before the election. They failed in their legislative effort at that point in time. So there'll be tens of millions of dollars spent in 1 district in Maine and 1 district in Nebraska to try and get that one could-be pivotal electoral college vote. The issue of the Electoral College, if the Electoral College fails to meet or doesn't come to a conclusion, then we go to the states. A lot of people don't know that, and every state gets 1 vote. And in fact, Donald Trump talked about this in Pittsburgh in September of 2020, and he went on in his way saying, if the Electoral College doesn't meet or they don't come to a conclusion, I'm president, I'm president. And I think that was basically behind the whole thing of January 6th and the idea of they could stop the Electoral College, he would be president. We have a primitive system. At that point, we hadn't reformed it, and the way the authority was given, they were proposing that the vice president could ignore or change the results. Luckily, Pence had the integrity to say, no, I can't do that. But if they had gotten a hold of those ballot boxes, which had envelopes in them that was sent by the states, they would have had to go back to the states to recertify the election by a deadline, that is by the 16th of January. And by then, we had 3 or 4 states off the rails, Arizona, Georgia, and others saying, no. That actually isn't the way the election turned out. They wouldn't have recertified. Then it would have gone to the House, and he still would have been president. We didn't fix that, but we did make clear that there is no discretion, that whatever is submitted by the states is binding, and the vice president is just there in a ceremonial capacity. So, but this also has narrowed the scope of our elections down to a few states, the so-called swing states. And, in 2016, Trump won Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin by 191,000 votes out of 23 million and was president. In 2020, Biden won Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin by 124,000 votes out of 19 million, and he became president. Those are pretty tight margins. And we're seeing the same thing in this election. back in the 50s and up through the 60s, there were 26 states that were considered in play. Now we're down to a maximum of 10, mostly 7, who are really dramatically in play. There is a solution proposed to thwart the Electoral College short of a constitutional amendment, the National Popular Vote Compact. 16 states plus DC have signed on. If we get to a majority, that is 270 electoral votes, then they will go with the popular vote. You know, I fully expect that would be challenged and sent to the Supreme Court, and of course, the Supreme Court probably wouldn't like it, but we will, that's something for the future. But that does give us some hope there. Then we come to the Supreme Court. Again, one of the 7 filters they put in place. You know, in 1803, the court actually arrogated to itself the authority to overrule laws passed by Congress. That wasn't in the Constitution. They just said, we have this power. And that was Marbury versus Madison. And they stuck down Section 13 Judiciary Act of 1789. And then, you know, it's not in the Constitution. That could be changed, and I'll get to that in a minute. You know, we went on with some pretty bad decisions. Dred Scott, you know, they declared the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional because it deprived citizens of their property, i.e. slaves, without due process of law. That was nullified by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments after the Civil War. Then we've had some good decisions, Brown versus the Board of Education, state laws regarding segregation, unconstitutional, you know, but Citizens United and some of their recent decisions, we've got a real problem with the way the Supreme Court is constituted. You know, FDR was so frustrated, he proposed to pack the court, expand the court, because they kept ruling against all of his New Deal proposals. And after he proposed that, finally, one justice started voting, Justice Owen Roberts, to support the New Deal provisions, and that did not go forward. You know, but with this current court, and even a little less in the past, in 2013, they overruled Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And that has led to a lot of mischief in states that were previously subject to review by the Justice Department for anything they did that limited access to the ballot or other things and changes. Unfortunately, you know, that's a huge problem and a looming problem that Joel mentioned in terms of trying to disenfranchise people, very, very targeted scientifically disenfranchisement, particularly of minorities, and in some states, you know, they're trying to prevent students from voting, and they have, you know. So, you know, we have another case coming to the court from the 8th Circuit saying there can be no private right of action under the Voting Rights Act, which is the only way it gets enforced. They're saying this case says only the Justice Department can bring forward a case, no private right of action, further restricting the Voting Rights Act. They've essentially vacated the Clean Water Act, one of the most successful laws in the history of the United States of America. When I was young, rivers caught fire. The Willamette was an open sewer. They want to take us back to those good old days. They have basically overruled the authority of EPA on 70% of the waterways in the United States to regulate pollution by doing that. And then that wasn't enough. So they also overturned something called the Chevron decision, which says, which has been accepted, you know, for almost 40 years, which is that experts in the agencies should be deferred to when it comes to regulations enforcing the law. They just said, they just flipped that out. So now any judge, anywhere, any district judge can say, yeah, EPA, what do you know? I'm a judge. And so they say, oh, well, Congress can fix it. That means Congress would have to write a Clean Water Act, which regulates every chemical that could go in the water, how many parts per billion or trillion that could go in the water, and as science develops, Congress would have to adopt more amendments to say, oh, wait a minute, now we've got this. Absolutely impossible to do, and that's a huge, huge blow to the environment, and we will begin to see more and more of that, coming forward. So, we really need to do something about the Supreme Court. 6 of the judges are in the Federalist Society. 5 of the 6 were appointed by a president who lost the popular vote, back to the good old Electoral College. We could try expanding the court. I think they're really overworked. I think they need help. We could do term limits, which they are judges for life. They are not Supreme Court justices for life. They could be a senior judge, or they could be assigned to a district in Alaska or someplace else to serve out their life sentence, their term. And then we could also, Congress could, but this would become a constitutional crisis, I'm sure, but Congress could, as I said earlier, the Supreme Court does not inherently in the Constitution have the power to overrule Congress like they're doing consistently. So Congress could limit their jurisdiction. It could also, put in place procedures for how justices would be chosen. Again, not enumerated in the Constitution. We could limit their jurisdiction in highly technical issues that relate to the environment or civil liberties. We could require a supermajority for votes to overturn laws passed by Congress. So there are ways we could potentially fix the Supreme Court. But these are the looming threats that are inherent in the founding documents of this country that are a problem. I'm not even going to get into some of the issues in this pending election, like Project 2025, which would basically, gut the professional civil service in the United States of America and make everybody subject to the whims of the President of the United States, and only there to serve the President of the United States, not the people, not the Congress, not the laws of the United States. We've taken one thing, for granted post Gore Bush, and that is, that our elections have great integrity. We did away with the Chads and those kind of voting machines, and until 6 years ago, 12 states were still only using electronic voting. Now there's only one state left, Louisiana, of course, that has electronic-only voting. And most states have a backup with paper ballots, which can be counted, as we saw in Georgia. They ran the computers twice, and then they spent 2 weeks and millions of dollars counting the ballots, and found with a Republican and a Democrat looking over every person counting, and they found virtually no difference. But now Georgia has passed a law that says that they have a new commission. They have taken the Secretary of State out of the equation. They control the electoral process. 3 of them are, of a certain political persuasion. And, they've said that they're not bound by the results of the election. But besides that, they are going to reinvestigate 2020 because they still believe the election was stolen despite the hand recount. And a lot of election workers have been threatened and left across the country. Some of these people have been elected to positions where they will be in power to count the ballots. So, that's another area where we need more solutions. So, in the end, there's hope, and the hope is we're still having elections. We're still in, I believe they're free and fair elections. I believe they are honest elections. And we have an opportunity this November to put us on a path where we can do some of the changes that I've mentioned here to better right our country in terms of, the direction for the future and the governance. And I always have hope, or I wouldn't have kept doing that for 36 years. I'm still doing it. I have a political action committee, and I'm very engaged in House races. At this point, I've given to 26. I intend to be in 35 races with my committee. And I've talked to some wonderfully inspiring aspirants to the House of Representatives who would be great. So with that, thanks very much. Appreciate you all being here. And I guess we do questions.
Yes, thank you, Congressman. We'll begin our question and answer in just a moment, but first I'd like to thank the business and in-kind sponsors whose support helps to make City Club possible. Thank you to our gold sponsors, Network Charter School, Hirschner Hunter LLC, Evans Elder Brown and Subert, Hudson Dental, and Luvis Cobb. Thank you also to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Dotson's Photography, Pack Info, and Kid Sports. Also a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs Monday nights at 7. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning in to City Club on KLCC, and we love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. We will take a brief break before returning for our conversation with Peter DeFazio. Thank you.
We will now start with the questioning. Proceed.
Hello, Mr. DeFazio. Thank you very much for being here. I'm a snowbird. I spend my time in Arizona and Eugene. I'm an environmentalist. I'm very concerned about the orca that are starving off the coast of Oregon, who cannot survive on hatchery fish. They need wild salmon populations to survive. The current plan is not going to work. They've thrown millions of dollars at trying to save wild salmon. I guess my question is, I'm very curious, what are you able to do now as a private citizen that you perhaps had your hands tied or felt constrained to do when you were actually in the Congress?
Well, I don't think people thought I was very restrained when I was there. And, I ordered the Corps of Engineers in 2 water resources development bills to evaluate the tributaries to the Willamette and look at the issues regarding salmon recovery, reopened spawning areas, and those sorts of things. The Corps has still, at this point, failed. I mean, they've done some drawdowns this last year, but they have failed to deliver the report, which was mandated in law twice. I think it's going to be mandated again in this water resources development bill. But, it'll somewhat depend upon, I'm going to say it's going to depend upon the election. I know this is a nonpartisan group, but, whether or not we can do more robust things to save salmon, for instance, the Columbia. There's some who propose dam removal. Actually, the only real study of dam removal was done by Clinton Gore, came out after they were done, 5-year study. And they said, well, actually, if we took out the dams, there'd be so much siltation. It's not going to be like the Elwha River or others that blow out, because it's not going to blow out unless we have a huge flood. You're going to have to transport every salmon for 10 years. That's not going to work real well. So the question is, what can we do better to enhance passage and do things to improve the Columbia? And that BPA has been spending a lot of money to restore and do things there, and more needs to be done up there. So we need to be certain that we save the things we have that are still pristine and working. I did wild and scenic for the Elk River and some other areas that are protected. There are other threats down southern Oregon and other places. We're going to get back the Klamath River finally by taking the dams out. So we're taking some pretty good steps, but more work needs to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, my name is Kelly Johnson, City Club member. You kind of outlined the potential problems that we face at the Supreme Court and some solutions. Another solution I have heard of is maybe instituting a more binding or enforceable code of ethics for our justices. Could you talk a little bit about that potential solution?
Yeah. There have been a lot of revelations about the Supreme Court, headlined by Ginny Thomas and Clarence. But the others, they are not subject to a code of ethics or that's meaningful or binding. They did adopt something meaningless internally. Congress could impose the same sorts of ethics restraints that are put on other federal judges and elected officials in terms of whether or not you can take gifts at all, reporting of gifts with penalties if you don't do any of that properly, criminal offenses, and that should be imposed on the Supreme Court. It's outrageous to have this guy Harlan, whatever his name is, from Texas, flying Clarence and Ginny all over the world. Meanwhile, he has business pending before the Supreme Court. I'm sure he was a big fan of the repeal of the Chevron decision, being a big oil magnate. So they really, really need a code of ethics, and a Congress could impose that.
On other federal judges, it is somewhat of an onerous procedure to fill out the forms required by the ethics rules for all the other judges but the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, and as a member of Congress, let me tell you, I mean, my wife has most of her PERS or whatever outside of PERS, her whatever, in mutual funds. I would have to report every movement from within a mutual fund, because somehow I might have inside information. It's like ridiculous. But I mean, to the level of detail that I have, unfortunately, the numbers are too broad for Congress, like between, 500,000 and 1 million or this or that, But yeah, it is a very onerous thing.
One follow-up question on the Supreme Court. The proposal to have term limits on judges and spread out the appointment so that each president gets at least one or two,
Right.
each term gets at least one or two justices. What do you think of that proposal?
Oh, I'm totally supportive. You should not have a Supreme Court where, you're going to have a president appointing a majority, one president appointing a majority of the court. So yes, we could have term limits, and we could stagger the terms, and you could either have a president would get one for every 4 years, or maybe, not assuming that presidents can get reelected, maybe two. That's to be debated. But yes, it's an excellent provision.
Hi, this is Sue Barnhart, and I wanted to...
You can bend it down a little
Okay,
so you can...
hi, this is Sue Barnhart. I wanted to thank you, Peter, for all your decades of service, and I wondered how we could find out who you think we should give money to try to keep a democracy going.
How
Well,
big a list do you want?
well, I mean, there's lots of ways. I mean, there are, groups out there that are, monitoring and working, on trying to preserve the democracy. I mean, you can look for a like-minded group or a group that's effectively working on that. I mean, it also comes down to elected officials, so participating, contributing. Again, can't be partisan here. I'm at the City Club, but, to, the person of your choice who might represent your views better, maybe even majoritarian point of view. I think there's lots of opportunities out there. So.
Yeah, I'm Bill Sherman, and I'm a guest for the City Club today. And you mentioned your PAC, and I'm just wondering, could you explain a little bit more about that? What are you doing?
Well, as a member of Congress, when I was in Congress 36 years. It took me 32 years to become a chairman of a major committee. So I had developed a leadership PAC, political action committee, where I could take contributions into that, and then I could give to other members of Congress or aspirants for Congress in the hope of keeping a majority so I could stay chairman. And when I retired from Congress, I had to convert that to something called a multi-candidate PAC, but I had a list of about 80,000 contributors. So I still am soliciting that list, and I'm still actively engaged, and I'm working through, from my side of the aisle, the Republicans have the same thing on their side of the aisle. They call them young guns, we call them red to blue, people who are, running to, for seats in Congress, or people who are in Congress. We call them frontline, I don't know what they call them, where they're trying to preserve their seat. And so I'm working off those lists, but I'm also going beyond that, because I'm not a huge fan of the Democratic Campaign Committee and don't think they're tremendously competent many times. So I'm working off a lot of different lists. I mean, I'll go to sources like Charlie Cook or say the Crystal Ball by, I can't remember his name. Anyway, what's his name? Anyway, the University of Virginia, it's a free service.
Sabato?
Cook.
Sabato?
Yeah, Sabato, right. Crystal Ball, he does grid analysis. There's something called Ballotpedia, which follows congressional races. Actually, if you go to Wikipedia, they have a very good summary of many of the ratings. So I'm working with many different sources to try and find people who need support, and I'm hoping to bring back a Democratic House majority,
So you're working on the House
specifically. Yeah, I did do a little bit of fundraising through that group for our presidential candidate, but mostly I am focused on the House, and I've done a couple of local things. I mean, democracy starts here at home. I'm going to vigorously oppose the attempt to gerrymander and redistrict the Lane County Commission to favor one commissioner's reelection. And so I am involved in some local politics too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Michael Kerrigan here. The issue of climate change is very important to us in Wayne County. What can we do to effectively pressure Congress to do more to save our planet?
Well, it is, I was talking about existential threats to our representative democracy. You're talking about an existential threat to continued existence on Earth. It is a huge issue. I mean, we've never had 2 consecutive days this hot in September that I can remember. The fires obviously are really, I mean, we're feeling impacts here. They're everywhere. Oceans warming, we talked about salmon earlier. It isn't just the dams and things that are problems. The warming of the ocean is a problem for salmon survival. On the East Coast, species are moving north by hundreds of miles. Lobsters are all moving to Canada. I don't think it's about the election. I think it has to do with ocean temperature. It has to be dealt with much more urgently and vigorously, Michael. And, unfortunately, Congress has failed to adopt any really meaningful steps. The Supreme Court, as I said, with Chevron, is just probably going to set us back a lot in terms of where we're at. We're not going to. That's going to become a problem. Right now they've stayed some air pollution standards that the EPA wanted to put in effect under Biden. We're now looking at not only having to push the Congress, hopefully have a president who believes in climate change and is pushing to do things about it, but also now we've got to deal with the problems created by the Supreme Court who's trying to set us back too. So it's not getting better. Sorry.
Mary Layton.
Mary Layton, City Club member. So I want to talk more about gerrymandering. A few years ago, in return for his service as an independent thinker who belonged to the Democratic Party, Marty Wilde got gerrymandered out of his district, and it was shaped in a way that only a Republican could win. Charlie Conrad won. Good guy. He got primaried by the Republicans because he spoke his mind on issues regarding choice and gender preferences. So my question is, what did you do then, or what could you do now to stop this craziness? Because it's resulting in many districts in the state and the country not even having a second party runner, because what's the point in running as a Democrat in this new, District 11 or District 12, whatever it is now? Is there any solution that Democrats might embrace and promote that would fix this problem?
Well, I think I mentioned briefly, I supported a bill in the House introduced by Zoe Lofgren, a member of the Judiciary Committee from California, which would pass constitutional muster to require that every state have independent redistricting commissions for the House. We can't impose anything on the states internally for their own elections, but for federal elections we could. And then had standards in place. There was one proposed here in Oregon that was actually a setup to have a Republican majority to gerrymander the state. Luckily, that one didn't get to the ballot, or if it did get to the ballot, it got defeated. I can't remember. I don't think it did get to the ballot. So it has to be well written, to deal with gerrymandering within the state and federally. And so there is a good federal bill to do this. I don't know that there's anything pending in the state, but you've got to be careful how you set up the commission, how you constitute it. California is a very good example of a good commission. It is truly independent, and when they did it after 2010, they had the largest turnover in their congressional delegation in decades. In one election, they put Democrats in with they said that district doesn't make sense. They had districts that were totally gerrymandered. and they did things that, looked at, and they had standards they had to follow. They put Democrats in with Democrats, Republicans in with Republicans, and we had, I think a very good result generally. The problem in California was, though, but they also have this stupid top two thing. And so sometimes even you'll have 10 Democrats and 2 Republicans in a primary, and they'll end up with 2 Republicans on the ballot in a Democratic district. And Washington has the same thing. That's another solution that is not good. I mean, just having well-drawn competitive districts is the key, because the House has become more and more partisan because in a lot of Democratic districts, you got to just worry about your left. In a lot of Republican districts, you just got to worry about the right. And that is what led us to the point where those lines no longer overlap in Congress. There's very little room for someone to work across the aisle.
Paul?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm Paul Thompson. I'm a City Club member for a long time. I'm interested in education of the next generations who are going to have to actually cast the ballots and make intelligent decisions about a lot of the issues that you've talked about. Can you comment at all on what you think the role of the public education system is in preparing those students to make intelligent decisions?
Well, it's absolutely critical that we teach critical thinking. For a lot of young people, the gravitation toward websites and things that are full of false information, all the problems with the social media. We need to really teach critical thinking. We also need to teach, government and governance. I mean, there's a lot of adults that say to me, "How are things in Salem?" I said, "No, I'm not. I don't work in Salem. I'm actually your federal representative." And a lot of people didn't. They don't even know I had to run every 2 years. They say, "Oh, we need term limits." I say, "Well, I got to run every 2 years. That's kind of like a term limit." So we need more robust education, and that in part is why public education is under attack, and it is around the country. And with the Supreme Court decisions and the now potentially moving education money to partisan or religious institutional schools, that's a real problem. I think a foundational part of our democracy is broadly based, well-taught public education. And if we lose that, we're in big trouble. By the way, my dad was a teacher for 30 some odd years, so I'm a little bit biased on that.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio, for your wonderful presentation. I'm Kathleen Willett, a member of City Club. I'm interested in the EPA and very concerned about your comments today about Chevron, et cetera. What does restoration of the EPA's power and integrity look like in the next administration? Hopefully it's going to go the way we want it to go.
Well, again, the way they wrote the decision, Congress is going to have to be somewhat more definitive. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know whether there are ways obviously, since this court doesn't follow precedent, a new Supreme Court, a different Supreme Court could overturn, they overturned 40 years of precedent, so we overturned their overturning the precedent, because Roberts did say he was going to follow precedent, and he hasn't. But for now, the only solution is when they do something to the Clean Air Act or something to the Clean Water Act, is for Congress to act. I tried, it was mostly under my jurisdiction, I tried to deal with the issue that was pending on the regulation of the waters of the United States, but was unsuccessful in getting that done. There are some legislative remedies to restore some of these laws.
Thank you.
Andrew Calix, City Club. You gave this speech 14 years ago, and since then, there's been a rise of authoritarianism in lots of places. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about sort of where America fits into that global story and why we've been seeing this, not only in our own country, but abroad. Thanks.
There's some, I can't remember, there's someone, I read it somewhere in my saved stories about where they rate democracies, and we are now entering into the sort of the red zone in terms of the threat to the United States, and they have, you know, along with a bunch of other democracies. I mean, look at the recent elections in France, Germany, and elsewhere. Part of it is, you know, in my opinion, a lot of it came with all this BS about globalization and free trade and the World Trade Organization, where we disenfranchised tens of millions of people from good livings here in the United States, the Rust Belt. For instance, the jobs went to Mexico to chase, you know, a country that doesn't have labor protections and doesn't have environmental rules. So I think that's part of the source. The social media, the internet is it just feeds this stuff. I mean, you know, a lot of these people used to be in little dark corners, and they didn't know there were a whole bunch of other people out there who were, you know, white supremacists like them or whatever other group or radical group, and that's going on around the world. And they, you know, they can go to Discord or go somewhere else, and they can find other people like themselves, and it's reinforcing and growing, you know, this sort of sickness, and it's a massive problem. And you know, I mean, we just talked a little bit about education, critical thinking, and those sorts of things, and you know, there's a lot to be done.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I'll turn the program back over to Andrew. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel. One more round of applause for Congressman DeFazio. This has been our September 6th conversation at the City Club of Eugene. Congressman DeFazio has been the perfect kickoff for our fall programming, much of which will be focused on key races and ballot issues that will be facing Oregon voters this November. Peter, I think I have an idea of where you stand on the redistricting proposal, but in 2 weeks' time, we'll have a debate about it right here. So come, learn from the proponents, learn from the opponents, make up your mind on that very important issue. And as a supporter of term limits, maybe we can debate that on this stage sometime. We'll also continue last year's series on key sectors of the local and regional economy, and that starts next week, right back here at Wow Hall on September 13th with a look at our local timber industry. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend.